But football, bloody hell. But they never give in. And that's the winner.
Home from Belgrade, where it had won its way through to the semi-finals of the European Cup. The plane was caught in a snowstorm on the runway of Munich airport on the afternoon of February the 6th, 1958. At the third attempt to take off, the plane crashed, and among 23 people who died were 8 of the Busby babes, while Matt Busby himself lay close to death in a Munich hospital for weeks. Tonight, a quarter of a century on, Sports Night pays its own tribute through the eyes of Barry Davies.
Here's a shirt then, Duncan. Get the change, kid.
And have you got no tape? Yeah. Want some tape? Check out some tape. Got any tape? Are you? Sir, you got any tape? Yeah. Is there any left? Lily? Yeah.
25 years on, and the yearnings of youth mingle with the memories of the more mature, as two local school teams compete for the trophy bearing the name of Dudley's most famous son, Duncan Edwards. A cup presented when he too was a schoolboy, captain of England, the start of a career which achieved so much in a span so short.
But if I had a match to play and my life depended on it, and I had one player that I could take with me out onto the field, it would have to be Duncan Edwards.
Big Duncan Edwards, he could just put a goalkeeper's shirt on him and he'd be the best man on the field.
But if I had a choice of one player, it was always Edwards.
He is one of the all-time greats. There's no question about that.
For those who saw him play, there will never be another Duncan Edwards. A legend for his physique, obvious even as early as 6 months old. A boyish enthusiasm he carried to manhood. For potential, good enough for heaven.
It started to crop up, this word, Duncan Edwards, this smasher that's playing for Wren's Nest Junior School. He was only 9 or 10 then. And every school that went and played them, or visited them, remarked on this lad, and everybody was saying, when he comes along up into the secondary modern schools, we're going to have a good one here.
The league clubs thought so too, but the local hero remained unaffected by the clamour.
The older he grew, I think, the more he shrunk. If you could put it this way, he was rather grooming himself for the future, I think.
He knew his own mind, he knew what he was trying to do, he knew where he was hoping to go. Strangely enough, he had no interest in watching football. He couldn't be bothered, say, to go to a professional football match and watch it. He wanted to be playing it. He'd much rather play football with a crowd of lads on the local park, mud tip, than go and see a First Division match. He just did not want to be a spectator.
How many books have you kept from your pupils? I mean, is it significant that you have one belonging to Duncan?
Well, only because I think I was much involved with him throughout the school.
But you decided that here was a pupil and you wanted to keep this particular book. Now, it seems obvious now, but it wouldn't have been at the time that you decided to keep it.
Well, I think it was, rather. I think he was going to have a glorious future. I think we knew it, and I would like that memento of Duncan when he was a lad.
I noticed that he was set an exercise about a wish to go to Wembley.
Oh, that's where he talks about his father and his Uncle George and asks where Wembley Stadium is.
A true wish? Well, it all began when I was a little boy of about 7 years of age. My Uncle George and Dad were sitting round the fire when my Uncle George said to my father, I see England playing Scotland at Wembley next Saturday. I thought to myself, now's my chance to ask him where this Wembley Stadium is while they are on the subject. I told my uncle, I wish I could go there, and he said I would before long. I was 13 and I still wanted to go to Wembley, and on the 7th of April I was picked to play for England against Wales. My uncle was right when he said I would someday go to Wembley Stadium.
Starting while still 13, Edwards was a schoolboy international for 3 years, winning 9 caps, the last 4 as captain. Matt Busby, always the favourite, won Edwards' signature for Manchester United. And at Old Trafford, the 16-year-old stepped onto a conveyor belt of youth, destined for triumph and for tragedy. These were the heady days, days of companionship and competition. Football was fun, and the faith placed in youth revolutionary. A new team was being built to win the championship, the Busby Babes.
It wasn't too long after the war. Most clubs were there was no place to look at, you understand, because football was at a very low minimum during the war. But hit on this youth policy. I had it paid here.
I come to Manchester City as a boy, 17-year-old, and I felt it. The young players of the club were the people who were interested more in the club. They were more dedicated. And when I got this appointment made at Manchester United by Mr. Gibson, I made my mind up I was going to start building on young boys. Whatever boys had talent or had some skill and some of that, I made it my point to make a very good youth policy, and I started from there.
Albert, what's your first memory of coming to Manchester United as a kid?
Meeting Matt Busby, I think. On a Sunday morning with a little pair of short pants on, my feet not touching the floor. And the trainer coming in, Bill Ingalls, and calling Matt Busby in, and looking at me and saying, "Here's another one of yours," and, you know, Busby just coming up and patting me on the head. And he says, "We'll make a player of you."
The main factor was they were brought up in the club from basically young boys, schoolboys, we like school-leaving age. And they become part of the club itself. Dedication to the club and trying to get into the team. And this was a very important factor.
I don't think you sort of realise what was going to happen. They used to come to you and say to you that, "Look, you can be in the first team." You know, when he was a 17-year-old lad.
They were brought up in the atmosphere of the club. And probably Jimmy Murphy was a driving force there. And they were Manchester United minded. They were Manchester, it was their life.
There's a great family atmosphere here. Terrific family atmosphere.
It was like a school. They used to play games for training. You know, if it rained or if it was foggy, we get a thick fog. They wouldn't say go home. You'd be playing games, you'd be playing rally ball and hiding in the stand. And I've seen people go up the floodlights just for something to do.
Life was all smiles, and while United kept a firm hold on the newly instituted FA Youth Cup, the Babes were born into the first team, which in 1956 brought home the championship trophy. Only Roger Byrne and Johnny Berry were left from the successful side of 52. Duncan Edwards came into the team at 16 and a half, and 2 years later had become the youngest to play for England. The spirit of British football, the England manager called him. They all were.
That's a long pass down byline, but Edwards is there to cut it off and push it back very comfortably toward the Manchester United goalkeeper. Throws it out to Whelan. Whelan dropping deep to get the ball. No one's moving for him. He's just holding it, And a very good pass indeed, right to the outside right position. It's Berry bringing it in quickly to Evans, the Arsenal fullback and left fullback. He's pulled it back. Oh, and this is too late. It's there. Oh, it is. Lovely goal there by Whelan.
John Barry receives and makes for the penalty area. He beats Ken Green. Everyone expects him to pass, but he fools them all and shoots. Manchester fans are wild with joy, but there's more to come. Outside left, David Pegg is on the move straight from the restart. Jeff Hall blocks him, but he retrieves it and tries again. Over to Bobby Charlton, who slams it home.
Everybody that arrived in United's youth teams wanted to be there. You know, there's none came under sufferance. There was this great love to get to play for United. And when we did get there, we all, in most cases, were in digs together, just down the road from Old Trafford. There's about 12 of us there. And you used to mix a lot, you know, as young lads. We used to go around together a lot. It was a terrific club. It was very, very hard by comparison to today, and as much as we used to have to do all our own travelling. We used to play at 16-year-olds in open age leagues, which was terrific, you know. And you go to Manchester, I remember going to play somewhere, I think it was Ferrandi's. We played against Ferrandi's, and the kick-off had to be 4 o'clock because it went dark at 5:30, 5:45. And I seem to remember us all on this muddy pitch somewhere out in Manchester, trying to keep warm, waiting for this team to come out, you see. And then at 4:15, the siren went, and these lads came out in the boiler suits and the black faces, you know. Where's these bloody United ponces, you know, I'll get stuck into them. And we're 16, you know, little lads all, and we had to tread a little bit warily. It was fantastic. It was a great experience and set you up for when you actually did go and play in the top bracket. And I think that they miss that sort of thing now. I'm sure they do.
The top bracket now included the European Cup. In '57, United, the first English team to enter, had fallen in the semi-finals. A year later in Belgrade, they were on the brink of that stage again. Their lead from the first leg against Red Star was narrow, 2-1, and so would be the final outcome, 5-4. United's goals in the first half in Belgrade saw them through, the first by Dennis Viollet. The others coming in a 2-minute spell from Bobby Charlton, a man destined to become one of England's favourite sons, having survived the tragedy which was about to leave a city numb and a nation bereaved. Of the 44 who boarded the charter plane home, 23 died in the Munich disaster. Together with officials and journalists, 8 players lost their lives. Mark Jones, Roger Byrne, Jeff Bent, Eddie Coleman, David Pegg, Tommy Taylor, Billy Whelan, Duncan Edwards. The blissful display at Highbury the previous Saturday was now an aching memory. The babes were no more. When United appeared again in the Cup against Sheffield Wednesday, the programme was filled with emptiness. Jimmy Murphy, the assistant manager, had been with Wales in Cardiff. It fell to him to replace the injured, some of whom would never play again, and the irreplaceable.
We played Israel at Cardiff in the World Cup, and I said to Matt, Matt, I'd rather be with the lads. See, I haven't brought up the lads, you want to be with them, that's it. No, he said, Matt said, no, you've got a job to do there. That's how that happened. And poor Bert, my good friend Bert, of course, took my place and he went. I had to find 11 players. Do you understand? 11 players, a lot of players.
And his daunting task lay not only at Old Trafford.
I went out with Matt's wife, Jean, of course, and the other players, wives and sweethearts. And Jean and I went into the very sick room where they had 50-50 chance of survival. I remember vividly, Barry, on the left was the pilot, who was well, his dear wife sat with him, unconscious. Across from him was Matt in oxygen tent. So I went across there, lifted up the flap of this tent effort, and he just turned his head and he said, "Oh, it's you, Jimmy." And he said, "Keep the flag flying." You know? Didn't converse long. He dozed off then. Across there, next to the pilot, was Johnny Berry. Very, very sad. Poor Johnny, how he survived, I wouldn't know. He had tubes in his mouth and his ears, tubes up to his feet. He was fed through the feet. Oh, right out, right out. Next to him was Duncan Edwards. I sat with him a while. He turned his head. And this is the saddest thing I've ever seen. Oh, been a part of. As a fact, he turned to me, "Oh, it's you, Jimmy." I said, "Yes," my ear down to his mouth. And he said, "What time do they kick off tomorrow?"
It was a half term and it was snowing, and You know, the world was very grim and you just sat there and listened to the radio and read the paper, and oh, it was dreadful.
And like everybody else, hoped that maybe the
You
news would
hoped
come right.
that, yes, perhaps he'd pull through.
A quarter of a century later, the leisure centre at Dudley offers its reminders of the boy who clung to life.
Duncan Edwards was the greatest player that I've ever seen, the greatest player that I've ever played with, one that I would have hated to have played against. I love talking about him because there's really not a great record of what he did because he only played 4 years. You know, people talk about him as an all-time great. You know, he only really played for 3 or 4 years at the top grade. He was a very funny lad. You know, he liked life, and he was very gruff and, you know, abrasive at times, but never in an unfriendly way. And the first time I bumped into him in the army, I arrived at Nestcliff during my national service, and it must have been killing him to be doing his national service when everybody else was playing football every day, you know. And we all hated it, but it must have been worse for him because he absolutely loved the game. And he picked me up outside the guard room when I arrived, and he took me to my billet and said, "Come on, I've got your bags, I've got everything for you. It's all sorted out. I've been waiting for you coming." And when I got in, they put my stuff down on the floor, and there was a spring missing out of my bed. "Don't worry about that," I said, "don't worry about that, I'll sort it out." And he literally picked the bed up and just walked straight out of the billet, and 2 minutes later came back with somebody else's.
He lived for the game, actually. I remember, you know, one of his famous saying, probably before the team would go out, and I'd be finished my last sort of speech or advice or talk, the big Duncan would get up and say, "All right, come on, lads, we ain't come here for nothing. N-U-F-F-I-N, nothing. We ain't come here for nothing."
He could do anything. He could either foot, right foot, left foot. He could manipulate the ball any way that he wanted to. If you wanted him to smash a 70-yard crossfield pass, he would pinpoint a 70-yard crossfield pass. He used to run around like a gazelle. He loved scoring goals. He was just a complete player. He was a fantastic defender. He was brave, he was good in the air.
Edwards was like a tank when England in trouble in defence.
His physique, of course, was outstanding. On the other hand, I think that it's possible that it can belittle his actual football ability.
He seemed to make it all so easy, and it was so effortless and so well controlled, and it was sort of naturally done almost by magic.
Despair bred determination. The spirit lived on. With time, if to some the healer, to those of that family of youth, a bittersweet reminder of what it stood for. Even for those who in the intervening years have found, as Albert Scanlon has, that people need to be told of the part he played.
It gets a bit, you know, hurtful at times when they say, "Oh, well, Bobby Charlton was there, and Tommy Taylor was there, and David was there, Roger Byrne. What were you doing there?" And I say, well, there was like Kenny Morgans, Dennis Violet, myself, Mark Jones. I was there by rights. You know, I went there to play, and I played. And they turn around and they say, "Yeah, but we've never heard of you."
But hurt is not bitterness for a man for whom life, since he left Manchester United 23 years ago, has had its ups and downs.
I would love to have stayed at Manchester United, but things didn't work out like that. I was there at the greatest time in the history of Manchester United, and I can live on memories. Nobody can ever take that away from me. I think it's a great feeling to have been there. As I say, other people have made fame and fortune, and I made memories. And I'm quite content today to have their memories as they are to have the fame and fortune.
10 years after Munich, United met Benfica in the final of the European Cup at Wembley. In the side were two survivors of the tragedy, Billy Fuchs and the captain, Bobby Charlton.
I think a lot about the people that were killed, and there was a little bit of them in winning the trophy. You know, it was something for them. Nobody would be really satisfied about Manchester United's re-emergence as a football power until they won the European Cup. It was something special, it was something really personal that we had to do.
Charlton! Another! He's got another!
I think that was the night of all nights. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. The fact that at last we had won the competition that we had set up and set out to do. The main thing is that we felt that the dead had been honoured. I don't think I've any doubt that we'd have won it with the lads that was destroyed in the air crash at Munich. But I felt it was justified myself. The fact that here, at long last, we'd achieved what we'd set out to do.
For the teenager of today, that night is a memory their fathers talk about. Fathers who were little more than kids themselves when Munich brought such desolation. To them, and more to those who hide the scars, a schoolboy contest in Dudley was both poignant and consoling.
The winner of the Duncan Edwards Cup 1983, Dudley School.
It's 25 years since the disaster at Munich. Edwards I brought to the club as a boy. I coached him, but he didn't need much coaching. He was already a player. I've handled great players. I've handled world-class players. I've seen great players. But I can assure you the greatest of them all was Duncan Edwards.
In St. Francis Church, Dudley, is a lasting memorial to greatness and to affection.
He was quite an amazing in every possible way. Not only playing, but his mentality, his approach. I don't think I'll be able to see one Duncan Edwards again.
Kids, you know, hear him, you say Duncan Edwards. He couldn't have been that good. But he was.
By the memory of Munich, from left to right, Dennis Violet, Ray Wood, Billy Fuchs, Harry Gregg, Ken Morgans, Albert Scanlon, Jackie Blanchflower, and Bobby Charlton. The only other survivor from the United staff was Matt Busby, the man who created the Babes and who believed they had only just begun to reap in the honours.
Felt that we had reached the stage when I could nearly have sat in my office for about 10 years and just went out and saw the match. They had reached that stage of experience, power, skill, and everything else. And there was prizes to be won, many prizes to be won, and I felt that probably they would have done wonderful things for a number of years.
After 2 league champions...
It would have made a big difference to England, without question. It would have made a fantastic difference to Man United. Me personally, I would probably never have played for England when I did. I would have never have been a regular in the first team as quickly as I was. With England, they would have had players like Tommy Taylor, Duncan Edwards, Roger Byrne, Eddie Coleman, David Pegg available at a period when they were just starting to make inroads into world soccer. From a club's point of view, we wouldn't have had to wait till 1968 to win the European Cup. I think we probably would have won the European Cup about 3 months or 4 months after the Munich air crash.
I heard a voice, Billy Whelan, and the voice came clear. It's still imprinted on my mind. If this is death, I'm ready for it. And I couldn't breathe properly, and I couldn't understand. Everything was now chaotic. And then suddenly, mercifully, I was flat out, blackout. Then I came to, and again I couldn't breathe, and I was underneath the aircraft, and I could just see grey light, the sky, and the snowflakes coming down, as though crying, if you like, for the...
When the year, turn of the year comes, the first thing you start saying, all right, well, we're getting towards the 6th of February, and you go through all the things that happened. Terrible, tragic time we had in the club and the people concerned who lost their lives, the parents of these people. journalists, staff, and everyone else. And no matter how long it is, one would say, all right, probably the first few years, it affects you more, and you're more aware of it. But time doesn't heal these things, Paul. It doesn't heal them for me, anyway.
I think, and maybe I'm not trying to be clever when I say it, I think he was fortunate in the fact that at the time and around the time, for quite some time, he was in no position to realize what had actually happened. And I believe that that maybe saved a lot of suffering.
Had that team not been destroyed, they could have been the greatest team ever. I think the foundations and everything was there for that one to go through, and people say that I am the most successful manager. I would have had something to pick Manchester United up if that team had been allowed to live.
Well, it was shock. It was utter shock. You know, and I was so close to Matt, you see. Matt and I played against each other and in the army together and played for the army together, and he captained Scotland, I captained England. So we were very, very close. And of course then, it was the Busby Babes. And I coached the England schoolboys, and Duncan Edwards, and there was David Pegg, Mark Jones, they were all in the side. So I knew the boys.
Let's look what England had got to look forward to. We were preparing for the World Cup in 1958, and Roger, who had moved from a forward to a full-back, was one of the top players in Europe. Duncan Edwards was the outstanding player, and I'm rather sad that youngsters have never seen Duncan play. They always say what a player he was, but they've never seen him. And then Tommy Taylor, he was just coming. And those were three players that were in the squad for England preparing for the World Cup in 1958 in Sweden.
To lose this and have to start afresh and to go into a World Cup within 3 months of the disaster virtually, what it amounted to, for the last match, we had two established players left, that's Billy Wright and Johnny Haynes. Tommy Finney had been injured, Clayton was out. And we had the rest of them were people who had played one international match. Two of them in the last match hadn't played international match at all, they were being capped in it. That's no way to go into a World Cup. So you can see the Manchester United disaster really destroyed my dream.
It was a tragedy not only to England, for Man United, but the whole of the world, a tragedy, loss of great players.
Well, this is a part of my history as a newspaper man. I always loved coming here because they were such a great side. And I think they set a milestone in English football. They were innovators. They were the first team to come into Europe. And now we're all aware of how European football is shaping. But these boys had to go in completely new, and they made a magnificent job. First year, they get to the semi-finals. They were not only a great team, they were an entertaining side.
Free kick to United, taken by Byrne. Headed out to the far side. Very cleverly held by Berry, beats his man. It goes to Edwards, which is a good thing for United. A long one from Edwards down the right wing. Taylor's there. Taylor cuts inside. Flicks it forward, still has it. And Taylor turns it back to Berry, shoots. It's a goal. There it is.
They'd got a fellow like Duncan Edwards. And people say to me, how good was Duncan Edwards? And I'm bound to say, and I was a great admirer of Bobby Moore, that if Duncan Edwards had lived, I don't think Bobby would have been a cap. Why not? Duncan Edwards played 18 times for England, scored 6 goals from left half, a goal every 3 matches. We've centre forwards that can't score at that rate now. Behind him, you had Roger Byrne. Roger Byrne was a magnificent left back, again, an innovator. If you think of Ray Wilson in the 66 side, well, he followed on a style that Roger Byrne had perfected. And when you looked at the right half position, little Eddie Coleman, he was a throwback to the old attacking wing half. He was a combination between an inside forward and a wing half, beautifully balanced, small, a magnificent tackler.
United leading by 2 goals to 0. Pegg, a long one out to the far side, heads go up there. Still bouncing in the goal mouth. He's hooked away out to this side. Pegg racing onto it. Turns it right across the far side again. Ahead of there by Corbin in the penalty area. First time shot by Taylor. It's blocked.
And then you look at the forward line, Tommy Taylor. Leave outside Lawton, and you have Lofthouse and Tommy Taylor. And probably Tommy would just have the edge on Nat even as a header of the ball. A fellow like Bobby Charlton, he couldn't get in the side. He wasn't a regular in the side. You had Liam Whelan on the ball, a magnificent player on the ball. You'd got Johnny Berry on the right wing. The only reason he never played regularly for England was there were two men by the name of Finney and Matthews. At outside left, David Pegg was, I think, just on the verge of becoming England's regular outside left. Mark Jones. You see, Mark Jones was a schoolboy international centre-half, and he was the kind of player that you would have to knock him down to get past him. And at the same time, you see, Matt Busby also had Jack Blanchflower. We all call him the best footballing centre-half in all the four countries. Jeff Bent. You see, Jeff Bent was really understudy for Roger Burney, but he would have walked into any other side. He was a marvellously skillful player. And it was just one of the points of the Busby Babes, as we called him in those days, that they had so many players to pick from.
United had been quick to take the lead. This was through a goal by Dennis Viollet, one of those injured in the crash. In the first half, the British team were making rings round the Yugoslavs, and they scored their second thanks to Bobby Charlton, another of the injured. This is how all would like to remember the boys of this great team playing typically fine football.
Everybody was quite happy. You know, okay, it was very bad weather, but all we wanted to do was to get home and tell our wives and families about what a great game we'd seen and happy to be back and bring in our presents. And just as we left the terminal buildings, you know, just the odd thought crossed my mind, because I was in the Air Force, you know, I wonder whether there's been any ice on the wings and have they sorted it out. But it wasn't a thing that dwelt on my mind.
It had started to snow a little. When we came back out for our first attempt at takeoff, we were leaving footprints in the snow on the first attempt, or before the first attempt, as we climbed back onto the aeroplane again. And it gradually got a little worse as we tried each time and got out of the plane. But after the second attempt, it had got quite a bit worse.
There was this very striking red building, which was quite clear. And as we came abreast of that, suddenly the skipper just put the brakes on and the props were just whirring round and, hello, what's gone wrong?
Well, we made 2 attempts before the fatal run, and on both of these occasions we had this boost surging, which was not terribly serious, but it was something that one ought to really do something about. And I abandoned the first takeoff and got permission to turn around on the runway and make another attempt. And this fort came out again, and at that stage I decided to go back to the tarmac to discuss it with the engineer.
We set off out to the plane. I had a Rolleiflex camera with me and nipped in front of the queue to take a picture of the boys boarding the plane. Duncan Edwards quipped to remark, another scoop. And I thought, well, it's just another delay if it's just another picture of United delayed.
When we boarded the aircraft in Belgrade, I found all my press colleagues had already settled themselves in the tail. Frank Swift was on this side, Henry Rose, George Follows on that side, I believe. And you see, we always flew together. We were always a happy party. But for some reason that day, I thought I'd move forward. And that was a decision that saved my life. I moved to the forward part of the aircraft because there was more room here, and also because the seats were facing the rear. And there was a lot of argument at the time that they were the safest seats. And there had been an air crash at Cardiff with a rugby team where only one person survived. And it was with that sort of indecision that I moved there, but in fact it was a happy decision. And here opposite me was Harry Gregg. Now I understand that Harry was going to play cards, but in fact he wanted to play with Yugoslav money, and the other boys wanted to play with sterling, and he just said, oh, well, I'm a bit tired, and he sat there. It was a lucky decision for him. Matt, as I recall, was on this side of the plane, just further down amidships. Here was my colleague, Peter Howard, the Daily Mail photographer, and his colleague, the telegraphist, and behind me there was Mrs. Lucic and her baby. And really, between Belgrade and Munich, I was so bored sitting on my own that I actually moved into the rear of the plane to talk to my friends. We were such a happy group. But anyway, on the vital runs, this is where I was sitting. This is how it was on the third tragic run. I fastened myself in, and we set off down the runway, roaring away. And as I looked out, I could see the red building where we'd stopped on the first two runs. And as I looked in that direction towards the wheels, I couldn't see whether they were off the ground. And I leaned forward and shouted to Bobby Charlton and to Dennis Weiler, have the wheels gone up? There was no reply. And at that moment, I thought, I'll see for myself. Turned, and that was the one moment of fear, because I could see the perimeter French apparently rushing towards us. And as I turned again in my seat, I got a terrific blow just behind my left ear, and I could feel my senses slipping away. There was a terrific bang at that moment, and as I turned like that, I could see the bulkhead caving in, and there were suitcases flying all over the place. And then as I was trying to clear my head, I couldn't breathe. And then mercifully, my eyes closed. And by that time, of course, we were through the perimeter fence.
The air hostess announced that we were about to make the third attempt and that lunch would be served immediately we were airborne.
At that stage, I thought everyone on the aeroplane was afraid. There's no doubt about it. Everyone on the aeroplane was afraid at that time, and no one was courageous enough, I don't know what you suppose you call it, moral courage, to stand up and say, I'm not going. And I feel myself, if anyone had stood up and said, I'm not going, I feel no one would have gone.
And I think it was about the speed of 85 knots that one of the engines started playing up again. And after a very short period, we overcame this boost surging and continued our takeoff.
I sat down very low in my seat, thinking if the belly of this thing does go up, we hit the roof, at least the seat saves my head. So I got down low for this reason, put my feet up on the chair in front of me. And let's say I prepared myself for what I thought might happen.
I was calling out the speeds as we achieved them, and we got to that point on the runway, which we know as V1, which I suppose you might say is the point of no return. And I called V1, and that was the critical point. We were committed for takeoff.
I watched the wheels lock, and I knew he was braking again, so I braced myself.
And at this point, the aircraft ceased to accelerate. And I saw the speed drop off from 117 in two stages, down to 112, and then to 106. And then Captain Raymond called out, Christ, we won't make it.
And I remember thinking to myself at the time, Christ, I'm going to get killed. And I've just made the big time. I never see my family again, and I won't see my parents. I remember thinking, I'm going to get killed in Germany. I can't speak German.
The runway disappeared, and Bobby Charlton was sat next to me, and I said, Bob, I think we're going to crash. He said, just relax. And there was a couple of minor sort of bumps, and then there was this bang, and the next thing was I was flying through the air, and after that it was very black.
As everything was blackness, and I couldn't understand this, and I thought I was dead. And I thought, well, I must be in hell because everything's black.
And then I asked Bob, I said, have we crashed, Bob? There I'm without a jacket that's been ripped off and his shoes had been torn away, and I'm asking Bob if we'd crashed. I don't know what I thought had happened to us.
The people who I think are absolutely magnificent were the people who were conscious. You know, Harry Gregg, who was one of the heroes, Peter Howard, the Daily Mail photographer. He went back in to save lives. And with him went Ted Elliott. Ted Elliott was his telegraphist. Now, Peter Howard went back, and I forget how many people he got out, but from my point of view, he got me out.
I made my way through this hole over one or two of the people that hadn't been as fortunate as I had, and started to run and got about 30 yards away before I stopped, looped round, and Ted was following me up. There's an air hostess following me up, and Harry Gregg had appeared and was stood there with his arms out shouting, come on lads, where are you all, where are you all?
I had no sense of fear, and I didn't think that I had time to be afraid after what happened, because I heard a child cry inside what was left of the aircraft, and I think this brought me to my senses, and I went looking for it.
One never realised, you know, the terrible tragedy that had, in fact, hit Manchester, and that thousands of people were virtually in mourning for the loss of these lads.
Well, I was with the Welsh team. The Welsh team played Israel in Cardiff in the World Cup, and my assistant went, Bert, poor old Bert, and he had my seat and he went. A taxi from town, and got the office at the top end there, and Alma George, who was our secretary then. I went upstairs, and there seemed to be no one about. It was most strange, there's no one around at all. And I had a drink, gave her a drink, and she said, haven't you heard, Jimmy? He says, heard about what? She said, the plane has crashed. It never struck me at all. And she said it again. Oh, I said, we'll have another drink. I'm a quick drinker, by the way, and answered my second one quickly. But she said it again, and she started to cry. And then it struck me very vividly. I thought, God, no. The last thing I thought was a plane crash. So in my John little office there, I went in, I cried myself for 20 minutes, couldn't realize it. It's hard to lose players you're brought up, more or less live with. Very difficult. They start to go into different funerals, you know, it's very, very hard. And probably two get buried the same day. You know, people everywhere, you know, inside in offices and outside particularly.
The men who were killed at Munich, everybody talks about the Munich disaster, and it was a terrible blow for this club. And sometimes people forget the terrible blow it was for journalism. You're speaking about some of the greatest journalists I personally have ever met. If you take Donny Davis of The Guardian, well, he was a great broadcaster, and he didn't just write a report. He had been an amateur international and a county cricket player. He not only wrote with knowledge, technical knowledge, but he was an essayist. Then you got Henry Rose of the Daily Express. Henry Rose was a great populist. He always used to say, people who follow sport want an argument. They want a discussion. So therefore, I'm there. Let's find out what the person in the 4 ale bar is arguing about, and I will provide it. You'd got George Follows of the Daily Herald. George Follows was a magnificent writer. He could have gone to Oxford, and he was just on the verge of going to Fleet Street. And I'm in no doubt at all that he would have ended up the best sports writer I've ever known. On the Daily Mail, you'd got Eric Thompson. He could have been a professional footballer, but he was not only a good technician that way, he had a marvellous sense of humour, and he used to illustrate his points with beautiful thumbnail sketches. So they were special people. And then you come on to Frank Swift. You see, he was a great personal friend. Swifty was not a journalist as you and I would understand it, but he was employed by the News of the World to give his opinions on the game. He got a tremendous sense of humour. And not only that, whatever he wrote or got the ghostwriter to do always had the mark of authority. Well, Archie Legbert was also a fantastic technician, both on cricket and on soccer. and he was doing marvellous work for the Daily Mirror. When he expressed an opinion about players read him because his opinion meant something. And then, of course, the two local papermen, Tom Jackson of the Evening News and Alf Clark of the Evening Chronicle. Now, Alf Clark had been a very good footballer himself. He was absolutely, this was his club. Manchester United was his club. In fact, of course, it was one of the tragedies that he nearly missed the plane. We were counting, Tom Curry was counting the players as we got on board, and there were a man short. And then suddenly a Jeep came up, and it was dear Alf in the Jeep. He'd been phoning the paper here in Manchester to tell them that we were held up. And everybody was pulling his leg, and of course, within a minute, Alf was dead. And if you want to know why so many lives were saved, it was really the incredible pre-planning of Professor Maurer and his staff. Maurer was not only a great surgeon, he was a marvellous organiser. And it was his assistant, the neurosurgeon, Professor Frank Kessel, who became like a surrogate father to me. He went out, and he was a man who escaped from Hitler in the war, and he worked in Manchester, at Manchester Royal, and he saw Big Swifty. Das ist ein englischer Fußballspiel. That was the first time they knew that it was an English football team. And he told me afterwards, I was lying beside Big Frank, and we were both bleeding from the mouth. But he said, alas, your dear friend died within a few minutes of being taken into our hospital. He said the belt had ruptured the main aorta artery, and Swifty died.
I'd worked with Matt, and he was sort of semi-conscious in a fashion. He said, "It's you, Jimmy." And he said, "Keep the flag flying." Johnny Berry was on the next bed there. Tubes everywhere in his ears. No, he was fed to the feet. And apparently he was unconscious for weeks with Johnny Berry. How he survived, I wouldn't know. And next to him was the great Edwards. And I sat with him for a while. He was sort of semi-conscious. And he turned his head and he said, "You're Jimmy." And he said, "What time's the kick-off tomorrow?" Poor fellow.
Now, that boy was mortally wounded, mortally injured, and the first thing he was thinking about was playing for United. Now, that explains Duncan Edwards' character better than any words of mine. And then this particular morning, 17 days, I think it was, but anyway, Dr. Graham Taylor of the BEA, as it then was, came in the room. He was talking to Jackie Blanchflower next bed to me, and as he got to the door, it's inscribed on my mind forevermore. As he turned the door, he just said, "I think you'll be able to stand the shock, but don't tell Matt. I'm afraid that Duncan couldn't quite make it. He died early this morning." Now, when he said that, that was the first time I thought, I can't live. If Duncan Edwards can't survive, how can I survive? Selfish attitude. And I felt as though I was going straight through the bed. And then Jackie was shouting, you know, he was crying. And I said, "There's no use, Jackie, he's gone. You've got to get yourself well, son."
And I heard someone say Duncan Edwards had died. I knew something terrible had happened. My wife, who was there, I said to her, "You have to tell me what has happened. This is making me worse." So when I went through the names, she either nodded her head or just her head like that, which meant that one was saved, the other was dead. Why did I take the club into Europe? Why would we go on a plane? I remember my first reaction was never to have anything to do with football again. And this was my mind in my mind. And my wife went again, come along one of these days and said, if these boys had their say that it's passed on, they would want you to carry on.
No one realized I went through hell, come back, and I had no one to talk to, really. plenty of people around, but I'm talking at mile 11 in soccer. And I just found a team of 11. We played Sheffield Wednesday first at Old Trafford. Sheffield team were in, obviously, in the programme, but when I was Manchester United, there was no names at all. Because the team, we didn't know what the team would be, and et cetera, et cetera. They locked the gate. There were 66,000 here on the ground. The enthusiasm was terrific, terrific.
Billy Fuchs wins the toss for Manchester United against Sheffield Wednesday. And it's the most dramatic game Busby's Babes have ever played. Wednesday and the striped shirts kick off. Less than a fortnight after the Munich air crash, the Babes are fielding a scratch side for a fifth-round FA Cup tie. And apart from Fuchs himself, the only member of the original team is goalie Harry Gregg. Now the United forwards are on the attack, and that was nearly it. Brennan takes the corner, and it's in. Pearson shot rebounds, but Seamus Brennan's there to land a beauty. 20-year-old Brennan was only included a few hours before the match, his first big game ever, and he scored 2 goals. 17-year-old Mark Pearson has the ball. Alec Dawson's ready to receive, and there's number 3. So Professor Maurer and 30 of his colleagues come to England to be welcomed by the Lord Mayor of Manchester and their host, Manchester United Football Club, which owes them so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking from my bed in the Iser Hospital in Munich, where I have been since the tragic accident of just over a month ago. You will be glad, I'm sure, to know that the remaining players here and myself are now considered out of danger. And this can be attributed to the wonderful treatment and attention given us by Professor Maurer and his wonderful staff who are with you today as guests of the club.
I got the stage, I was in a way, I was terrified to come and look at the ground and feel the people at that time. And as I say, the biggest obstacle, once I'd done it and I'd forced myself to do it, I had to do it. There was a sudden relief for me. It was a very trying time.
You know, it was bad enough for those of us who, I think, well, okay, I got a lot of injuries, but I mean, that was me, just me. But here we'd got a man who built an ideal and just smashed right in front of him. Human lives that he'd known since they were little boys.
I would never have been surprised within a year of it happening had I turned around in a coach and saw the lads there. That was the feeling I had about it. Had I turned around in a coach, I don't think it would have shocked me. They should have been there. They were taken away so quickly and so suddenly that it didn't really sink in.
I've never discussed the crash with Sir Matt or anyone who was involved in the crash. So I think we keep our own thoughts on it, and we keep our own, we never discuss it. But I felt I always had something driving me on, and I'm sure it was that.
I always think back when I've been successful to how lucky I've been, and wish that I wish that the particular lads that went, that are not with us anymore, could have been there to share it, because they had a big part in it, because the great drive to winning the European Cup was not just for the players' own personal achievements, but probably to prove something and to make something what seemed to be right happen.
That night at Wembley, it was a crowning glory for us all. For the players that had gone in the crash, for Bobby Charlton and Bill Fuchs, who were members of that team, who fortunately survived, even the players, the directors. Laird was the chairman, and directors, and everybody concerned. It was a night of achievement, with the tragedy there was joy that night. They were still only boys, really. Most of them were killed at 21 years of age. I think the country lost a team which would have been the talk of Europe and indeed the world. Certain times it comes back to me. I think that'll live with me all my life. I think they'll live forever in the history of football because I think they actually created something in their short life in the game.